This isn't just a film about 9/11 and the wars that followed. This isn't just a film about the press and the Pentagon. It's about our world and how information is conveyed and how prejudice is fostered by deception. About how we are subjected to indoctrination and used and pitted against each other. To understand the massive military expenditures and how they are eating up so much wealth, the first hurdle we have to get over is this trust in the mass media and the stigma against the concept of conspiracy. There are a lot of strange conspiracies about many things, but that is not a reason to reject conspiracies categorically. For example, the Iran-Contra affair was a massive government conspiracy hidden from the press and public for years. It happened in my lifetime, and it involved billions of dollars in multiple countries. This was a case where one part of the government didn't even know what another part of the government was doing. Thousands of people were murdered. Multiple countries in Central America as well as Iran and Israel were involved. And yet it was kept as a total secret from the media, or perhaps by the media, for years. Not only was it possible to hide this from the public, but most of the government was unaware of the activities of a small cabal from within. Covert actions and deception in the press aren't irregular, it's normal. The continuity of government, with a compartment within the CIA, was acting on its own with other intelligence agencies for selective business interests. And it had made plans to subvert the Constitution for the Homeland Security State in the event of a disaster.
Colonel North, in your work at the NSC, were you not assigned at one time to work on plans for the continuity of government in the event of a major disaster?
Mr. Chairman.
I believe that question touches upon a highly sensitive and classified area, so may I request that you not touch upon that, sir.
The CIA, along with Zionist hawk Michael Ledeen and Iran-Contra middleman Ghorbanifar, financed their operations with illegal arms and drug sales. Opium from Laos during the Vietnam Wars in the Golden Triangle, cocaine from Central and South America, and presently opium in the Golden Crescent from Afghanistan. The black market weapons trade and the sale of illegal drugs such as cocaine and opium are routine methods to finance black ops, off-the-book operations hidden from oversight. In fact, some of the same people, Ledeen and Ghorbanifar, had themselves neck-deep in the Niger forgeries, which acted as a central lie in the pre-war propaganda of weapons of mass destruction used as a pretext to wage preemptive war on Iraq. It is crucial for people to understand this because one of the reasons they reject conspiracy theories about 9/11 or about Iraq is because they just can't fathom that it could be done. They assume wrongly that the media would say something. Millions protested the war before the invasion and received virtually no coverage. That bubble has to be popped. The Iran-Contra scandal has since been admitted to. However, many of the people involved did not get in any real trouble. They were simply given presidential pardons, either by Bush Sr. or Bill Clinton. And the commission chosen to investigate the affair was actually chosen to cover it up. This pattern of crime and damage control continues. Take Brent Scowcroft, on the Tower Commission to investigate illegal arms sales, later chairman of the American Turkish Council, and involved in illegal arms trades himself. When patriots expose how blatantly obvious it is that there is a cover-up, regardless of how much evidence they have, the criminal's last refuge is to hide behind the stigma associated with conspiracy. They want you to ignore history in favor of belief based on authority. It is crucial for one to understand the national security state and its capacities before we talk about 9/11 and the lies about preemptive wars. A lead investigator into Iran-Contra gave most of the key suspects immunity. His name was Lee Hamilton. Lee Hamilton was later chosen to be part of the 9/11 Commission. The 9/11 Commission was a complete farce and a total whitewash. But we'll be digging into this bunch later. Let's just say Lee Hamilton had experience covering for the national security state. He didn't lose any sleep over helping the neocons where Cold Warrior meets Zionist fanatic. On the House Select Committee to investigate the illegal arms trades with Iran was the ranking Republican, Dick Cheney, later made Secretary of Defense after the Senate refused to confirm John Tower of the Tower Commission whitewash. Dick Cheney, of course, would serve as vice president for George Bush's son, W., president during 9/11. These crooks continued to work in government regardless of what administration was in charge. And if you're still under the delusion that the left or right matter, you won't be by the end of this film. The CIA and Mossad have conducted countless covert operations and false flags, too many to name. Heads of state have been assassinated, puppets have been installed. The security state's personal interests are thinly cloaked under the guise of fighting communism, or now terrorism. But rest assured, the invasion of Afghanistan had nothing to do with looking for Osama bin Laden or 9/11, and invading Iraq even less. Invading Iraq under such a pretext, even if one swallowed the official version, would be as silly as invading Mexico after Pearl Harbor. Of course, one would think differently after watching the mass media in the run-up to the war. The press is a PR machine for the Pentagon. They acted as nothing but talking heads for Pentagon talking points. The state-run media, if it reports a scandal at all, reports a filtered version of it. In the state-run education, well, we're lucky if our kids can even speak their own native language. State deception and conspiracy isn't rare, it's normal. Blindly believing your TV is irresponsible and it's stupid. There is nothing kooky or funny about covert warfare and assassinations. It deserves open scrutiny and sincere investigation. To pretend that America's foreign policy is based on benevolence is outstandingly ignorant. To deny the actuality of covert actions and massive deception is equally as asinine. There are way too many counterexamples of successful conspiracies and hoax. For example, man-made global warming hype has been based on politics, not science. But look at how uniformly academia, the media, and the government work together on the myth. We're not just talking about hiding assassinations. The U.S. has been able to kill millions using covert warfare. See here John Stockwell talk about the CIA's secret wars on the Third World.
We launched the largest, this is something that Jimmy Carter did, Admiral Turner brags about it, the operation in Afghanistan. Biggest single operation, I'm told, in the history of the CIA's secret wars. And sure enough, very quickly we produced the Golden Crescent, which is still the largest source of heroin perhaps in the world today. Trying to summarize this Third World War that the CIA, the U.S. national security complex with the military all interwoven in it in many different ways, has been waging. Let me just put it this way. The best heads that I coordinate with studying this thing, we count at least minimum figure 6 million people who've been killed, and 6 million people who've been killed in this long 40-year war that we've waged against the people of the Third World.
Iran-Contra took the Kissinger model to new heights. Never had the military and intelligence agencies sought so many private sector sources of finance to such a degree. And in keeping with the distancing factor of the old British system of privateering, combined with the leverage of the global arms industry market, the U.S. had no shortage of willing partners to needlessly kill for profit. The fact that it was done showed a new step in the magnitude and capacity for multinational covert activities completely divorced from moral limits or even common interests other than profit. Israel's ability to completely control coverage of its crimes is important. 9/11 was immediately falsely linked to Iraq by Israel. And as you will see, the pre-invasion hype, the anthrax attacks, spies, and even 9/11 itself all link back to Israel. However, the U.S. was a willing partner. The U.S. wasn't fooled. It was fed a pretext, which it eagerly accepted. The plans for war, the Patriot Act, and massive profiteering had already been made and decided for years. The war in Iraq wasn't based on mistaken intelligence. It was based on lies, known deceptions. However, if a person relies only on television to tell them that Iraq did not have weapons of mass destruction and there never was any evidence for that claim, that the U.S. had no real interest in liberating the Kurds or allowing a legitimate democracy, that they planned perpetual war from the start, that permanent bases were always part of the agenda, and that intelligence agencies intentionally fostered religious infighting, even going as far as posing to be one faction while murdering another to set off cycles of revenge killings. Then they will always be in the dark, because this is not going to be on television. The media doesn't report it. The media is owned by the Pentagon. They have overlapping board of directorates. It is one large corporation. They lie. Iran-Contra was a conspiracy. John Poindexter was convicted of conspiracy. Here we have a massive geopolitical covert operation done by a faction within the American government concentrated in the office of the Vice President and the Department of Defense, working jointly with a faction in Israel to illegally sell arms and drugs in order to procure profits to pay off the Contras to fight the Sandinistas. And the entire time that the Americans and the Israelis are working together to do this, the Israelis were spying on the United States and stealing nuclear secrets. It wasn't until after Iran-Contra was busted that Jonathan Pollard was also ousted as a spy for Israel and thrown in jail. Later, in the build-up to 9/11, once again, we have a cabal within the U.S., concentrated in the office of the Vice President and the Defense Department, working with Israel to set up this event. And the entire time, again, Israel was spying on the United States and stealing nuclear technology. And then if that isn't enough, the same men that whitewashed the investigation into Iran-Contra were chosen again to whitewash the investigation into 9/11. That is why I'm bringing up Iran-Contra and Israel. People involved in Iran-Contra were also part of the continuity of government, an emergency backup government that became a shadow government. The Contra operation was run out of the office of the Vice President by former CIA Director George Bush Sr. George Bush Sr. was the director when the CIA was preparing intelligence cells in Pakistan and Afghanistan to fight a proxy war with the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. Call them modern privateers.
In the early 1980s, bin Laden worked with operatives from U.S. intelligence, the Pakistani military, and Arab states. They ran a wide-ranging covert network that recruited and financed Muslim fighters to battle the Soviet army.
These units were used again to finance 9/11 hijackers, who were under the protection by top officials of Chertoff and Goss, who intentionally stifled FBI attempts to investigate members of these cells, thus assuring 9/11's success. The question is, did the privateers double-cross the U.S. in a form of blowback, or was it jointly planned? It was planned and assisted. Not only were the bagmen who financed the operation protected, the hijackers themselves were relocated 2 steps ahead of the FBI, thanks to the Israelis' phone taps and monitoring of both the feds and the hijackers themselves.
Some American terrorism investigators fear certain suspects in the September 11th attacks may have managed to stay ahead of them by knowing who and when investigators are calling on the telephone. And what troubles investigators most, particularly in New York in the counterterrorism investigation of the World Trade Center attack, is that on a number of cases, suspects that they had sought to wiretap and surveil immediately changed their telecommunications processes. They started acting much differently as soon as those supposedly secret wiretaps went into place.
They also monitored the airports and planes. Those were needed to explain and justify the event. The assured damage was done by bombs within the buildings. As you will see later, bombs and bombers were found on 9/11. The bombers were released, and the steel from the building was quickly destroyed, shipped off to China and India. There is no way this was done simply as a double cross. No one but the government itself would have the means to do something like run a drill of the exact scenario of 9/11 on 9/11 to assure that interceptors would be too far away and confused to stop the planes. Dick Cheney, vice president and husband of the president of Lockheed Martin and longtime member of Project 908, purposely held back defense until it was too late to act. Bin Laden did not have the authority or power to force FBI agents off of his trail. Bin Laden didn't have the means to set up a false flag and steal anthrax from within American labs and take credit for it with his hijackers and associate it to Iraq to falsely lead America into believing that Iraq and Al-Qaeda were together and start a war there to bog down American forces. The U.S. and Israel did that all on their own. The U.S. government provided protection, Pakistan the money, Israel bombs, and Saudi Arabia provided some bodies, useful idiots being guided by Mossad within the hijacker cells. A lot like the Oklahoma City bombing, where the FBI's COINTELPRO were actually directing the racist groups and practically creating the terrorism themselves, needing to be embedded in a group merely so that there would be some form of patsy to blame it on.
One explosion caused, because here's now what we are starting to learn about the succession, or what someone obviously hoped would be a succession of explosions. The first bomb that was in the federal building did go off. It did the damage that you see right there. The second explosive was found and diffused. The third explosive that was found, and they are working on right now as we speak, I understand, both the second and third explosives, if you can imagine this, were larger than the first.
He told us the operatives had been instructed to ensure that the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping.
Within the hijacker cells were leaders who were not idiots, but operatives guiding the attack. These men used fake passports and planted evidence after the attack to create a paper trail in the direction that they wanted. Muhammad Atta, or the man claiming to be him, was certainly one of these operatives and never boarded his final flight. He probably dressed as a crewman and slipped onto another flight, ultimately leaving the country. That's my speculation. Just a moment, you say. Wouldn't this be in the media? Bombs in 9/11? Israeli Mossad agents spying on the hijackers and the Fed helping the hijackers? Money from Pakistan and Saudi hijackers? Surely the news media would uncover this, right? More like cover it up than uncover it. One must understand that TV media is state-run. They lied uniformly to create a war with Iraq. The 9/11 wasn't just about starting wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Those wars are part of a larger plan for a new century. We'll be diving into that later. 9/11 is hiding trillions in unexplained funds. How could this be covered up by the press? 2,900 American civilians were attacked and killed that day. Well, I have a news flash for you. Israel attacks and illegally occupies people every day, and that's not on the news either. In fact, with the same mentality of a rapist, they blame the victims. Before discussing 9/11 further, I think it's crucial to get around this media issue. In order to understand the events of 9/11, you'll have to come to terms with our mass media and their undeniable complacency and willingness to lie to the public. What you won't see in the U.S. media.
Carl, what about this question of advanced knowledge of what was going to happen on 9/11? How clear are investigators that some Israeli agents may have known something?
Well, it's very explosive information, obviously, and there's a great deal of evidence that they say they have collected, none of it necessarily conclusive. It's more when they put it all together. A bigger question, they say, is how could they not have known? Almost a direct quote.
I'm going to show you some clips of the truck bombings in case you forgot or never saw them or don't believe me. And also pay attention to these live reports about explosions at the base, the lobby, the basement of the building. These are reports from eyewitnesses, survivors, firemen, police, and the FBI. This would all get a nice church-off whitewashing and be replaced by pancake theories on one extreme and disinformation ranging from everything from Bavarian death cults to space aliens on the other.
Okay, I'm okay, all right? Here, move. You want to call your mother or something? All right? Don't worry about me. You need to make calls right now.
We just heard another explosion. They're handing out gloves and masks.
NBC's Pat Dawson is close to the scene of that attack. Pat?
Just moments ago, I spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department. He received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place. And then an hour after the first hit here, with the first crash that took place, he said there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. According to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. The second device, he speculates, was probably planted in the building.
But as soon as I got outside, I heard a second explosion and another rumble. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last.
And you were working there? Yes, I was right there. I was down in the basement, came down, all of a sudden the elevator blew up, smoke. I dragged the guy out, his skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out, and I helped him out to the ambulance.
Thank you. Right? He said that they saw an airliner go into one of those towers. Then, an hour later than that, we had that big explosion from much, much lower. I don't know what on earth caused that.
We've heard reports of secondary explosions after the aircraft impacted, whether in fact there wasn't something else at the base of the towers that in fact were the coup de grace to bring them to the ground.
Do we have Jim Smith available on microphone from Chopper 2 as he takes these pictures? Jim?
Yes, I am here, Michael.
Jim, tell us what's happening out there.
We just witnessed some kind of secondary follow-up explosion on the World Trade Center number 2, the one that is on the south that is difficult to make out.
As effective as a bomb being dropped there were two bombs in effect. Commercial airliners flown into those two buildings and they came down. We presume because of the initial explosion there may have been secondary explosions as well that were detonated in the building by these terrorists.
That would put us about a block and a half away from the site of where the explosion was. That area has just been evacuated because police have found what they described as a suspicious device, and they fear that it might be something that could lead to another explosion. Obviously, there's a real sense of caution here on the part of police. I spoke with some police officials moments ago, Chris, and they told me that they have reason to believe that one of the explosions at the World Trade Center, aside from the ones that may have been caused by the impact of the plane with the building, may have been caused by a van that was parked in the building that may have had some type of explosive device in it. So their fear is that there may have been explosive device planted either in the building or in the adjacent area.
I think a bomb went off in the lobby first, then a plane hit the building, then another plane hit the other building. But when I was coming through the doors on the other side of the Trade Center, either they blew the lobby up or something, because it blew the glass out of the doors and knocked us all down, and I got smoke and everything on me. I just feel a little shook up because I got blasted, so.
The ladies that are with me were in the World Trade Center in the first building and escaped through the lobby where they believe there was a bomb in the lobby.
And even the turnstile was burnt and was sticking up, and they just told us to run.
And as we were coming out, we passed the lobby. There was no lobby. So I believe the bomb hit the lobby first, and a couple of seconds in the first plane hit.
And all of a sudden it sounded like, I don't know where the subway is, but it sounded like a subway collision, a bomb, and it was just pounding, boom, 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 and I literally thought the subway had exploded and all the cars pitching around on top of it. It was so loud.
I was actually in the subway heading towards the World Trade Center right around Franklin Street, and after the first explosion, the subway station started to fill with smoke. The subway cars started to fill with smoke, and the subways actually stopped.
It was that he was in the lobby of World Trade Center 1 when the first plane hit, and when the debris started coming down, he went back to go into the building to protect himself and was in the revolving doors going back in off West Street when he looked up and a fireball came flying out and blew out all the windows and threw him back onto the street.
Once the plane hit the top, then that's when the bomb was going off on the first floor. It's like the plane was actually hitting the first floor. You was hearing boom, 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 boom.
Explosion that was in the World Trade Center at about 8:46 a.m. in the morning.
The explosion came from, I believe, at first we believed that it came from the mechanical room. And then we heard a series of other explosions that sounded up on the above levels of the building, to where we then realized that there was something wrong and there was a major problem.
What happened? It was an explosion. He was in the lobby and the third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
What was it like? What was it like?
Horrible.
It's like hell. You don't want to know.
The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Is that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the planet probably?
Yeah, definitely a secondary explosion. But we was inside waiting to go upstairs, and on the way upstairs, the whole fucking thing blew. And we just collapsed on everybody inside the lobby.
Similar to the first tower coming down, secondary?
I don't know about the first one, but I know the second one was terrible. Then there was a third one too after that one.
Third explosion after that?
Yes. Everybody was inside the building waiting to go upstairs, and they just let loose. Everything just let loose inside the building.
So what you told me is that there was a plane or whatever hit the building, then a secondary explosion.
It was like 3 explosions after that. We came in after the fire. We came when the fire was going on already. We was in the staging area inside the building, waiting to go upstairs. Then they exploded. The whole lobby collapsed on the lobby inside. Right in front of our eyes. Just I know, at least 3 or 4. It was so surreal, like a movie set.
Second and third explosions also, right?
We were in the building for the third one. It collapsed. It was on this drive here for the other one. This is on top of this. It couldn't be no worse than this. Couldn't be nothing no more worse than this. You're in the building trying to help people, and it's exploding on the inside the building. So I don't think we get any worse than this.
Joining me is Jack Kelly. Now, he is a foreign correspondent. He has some information about these attacks. Jack, what can you tell us happened first in New York?
Apparently what appears to happen was that at the same time 2 planes hit the building, that the FBI most likely thinks that there was a car or truck packed with explosives underneath the buildings, which also exploded at the same time and brought both of them down.
Now, that's the first time we're hearing that. So 2 planes and explosives that were in the building, is that correct?
That is the working theory at this point. That is still unconfirmed, but that is what the FBI is going on at this point.
The New York City Police Department has a report that the FBI is responding to New Jersey because a truck reportedly loaded with explosives has been stopped by authorities on the road there, and the men with that truck have been detained. Members of the Joint Terrorist Task Force, according to the New York police officials, are responding to question those people. I want to underline that all the phones to police headquarters and to the FBI from here seem to be disabled.
Still alive in the rubble in and around the World Trade Center. And word late tonight that 2 suspects are in FBI custody after a truckload of explosives was discovered around the George Washington Bridge. That bridge links New York to New Jersey over the Hudson River. Whether the discovery of those explosives had anything to do with other events of the day is unclear, but the FBI has 2 suspects in hand, said the truck load of explosives, enough explosives were in the truck to do great damage to the George Washington Bridge. But they arrested the 2 suspects and they're questioning them as we speak.
There are at least 2, possibly 3 vans stopped by police on 9/11, and another 4th van spotted by a journalist. One had 5 individuals and traces of explosives. Another had 2 individuals and was packed with explosives. The 3rd van got away, and the 4th was a diversion. The first van had been spotted earlier in Liberty State Park by a witness who saw 3 men celebrating and filming the World Trade Center attack. Because of the timestamp of the bolo, as well as reports from the New York Times and Fox, we know these men had been filming the entire event, which shows prior knowledge. Because of the matching license plates, we know that this was the same van later pulled over on Route 3 in East Rutherford by police, which had 5 individuals. Now, either the witness from Liberty State Park had not seen 2 of the men, or the 3 she did see had picked up 2 more. They were all Israelis, and had taken pictures of themselves flicking lighters with the burning World Trade Centers in the backdrop. The second plane had not even hit, and many people assumed the first was a bizarre accident. But not these excited Israelis. They knew. Their van was traced back by its logo, Urban Moving Systems, to a front for the Israeli Mossad, Israel's CIA. And 2 of the 5 men arrested's names popped up on the CFI and FBI's database as Israeli agents. They had over $4,700 stuffed in a sock and highlighted maps of New York and New Jersey. This event, damning as it is, has had a Lewinsky-style distraction effect, pulling attention away from the far more damning van stopped near the George Washington Bridge packed with explosives. Aside from eyewitnesses, the van bombs and arrests were reported by ABC News, CBS, CNN, Haaretz, Jerusalem Post, Fox News, USA Today, The Wall Street Journal, the police themselves, Army Radio, several New Jersey papers, and so forth. And Urban Moving Systems was only one of several fronts working that day, which also had prior access to the towers. These were not the only two mysterious set of vans stopped on 9/11. There was a third truck, which was obviously a diversion, on King Street, which actually depicted a mural of a plane slamming into the World Trade Centers, and those two individuals were arrested. Obviously, this was a diversion to pull police in that direction, because no one would drive around in a truck with a painting of 9/11 on it on 9/11 unless they were purposely trying to attract the attention of the police and pull them in a certain direction.
With a mural painted of an airplane diving into New York City and exploding. I don't know what's in the truck. The truck is in between 6th and 7th on King Street. Alright, 10-4, I'm sending you to the bomb squad there for Westgate. The first airplane diving into New York, blowing up. 2 men got out of the truck, ran away from it. We got those 2 under. That's good. Listen, you didn't get any further on those 2 guys over there. You alright over there, Kate? Yeah, both suspects under K. We have the suspects who driven. Go in the van and then...
There was also an emergency 911 telephone call reporting that Palestinian bomb makers in a white van were headed for the Holland Tunnel. Unless they had a flag or something, I'm not sure how the caller would be able to tell if they were Palestinian or not. The caller, using poor English, said, "I see them at the airport mixing something, and they were dressed like sheiks, dressed like an Arab." This would have fit well with propaganda aired later in the day of dancing Palestinians celebrating the attacks on 9/11, which turned out to be a false tape. Of course, the only people driving around in vans for an intelligence agency who actually were celebrating the attacks and were caught dancing were Israelis, and the first words out of the driver's mouth were, "We're Israelis, we're not your problem, Palestinians are the problem." Apparently this idiot hadn't put it together that the plan hadn't worked out as smoothly as they had hoped. Yaron Shmuel lied to police about where they were at the time of the World Trade Center attacks. We know he was one of the original 3 of the 5 arrested because he admits it later on an Israeli talk show that he was there taking pictures of the event. Glenn Ford also spotted another van with 2 individuals speaking Hebrew and taking pictures of the towers. The van must have been in the park before or just as the towers were hit, because the park was closed after the first tower was hit. It was one of the only vehicles remaining in the park. The 2 men lied and said they were Polish. The Israelis arrested on 9/11 who were driving around in vans which were a front for the Mossad were detained and interrogated and failed their polygraph test. However, they were released by Chertoff and deported back to Israel and left alone. The owner of the Urban Moving Systems warehouse fled to Israel. The FBI raided the complex and confiscated computer hard drives, and the FBI listed him as a 9/11 suspect, and he remains a suspect by the FBI's official version. However, Israel is not going to let him go, and the press isn't going to pressure for it. The creation of the Department of Homeland Security, briefly called the Office of Homeland Security, an executive post-9/11 spawn before the Homeland Security Act passed later to make it officially and legally more legitimate and change its name, quietly incorporated FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, under its wing. FEMA was responsible for the 9/11 cleanup. Oddly, they were positioned in New York September 10th, the night before the attacks.
To be honest with you, we arrived on late Monday night and went into action on Tuesday morning. And not until today did we get a full opportunity to work the entire site other than the spot at Church and Day to which we were deployed.
Reagan was elected to the presidency, he installed Louis Giuffrida as head of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. Giuffrida, North, and George Bush began to turn FEMA into an instrument of domestic anti-terrorism.
You're dealing with a group of people in the Reagan administration who equated political dissent with treason, and who cannot differentiate between emergency procedures, which I think everyone agrees are necessary, and suppressing political dissent. And with North and Poindexter and Casey, you had a group of people who saw Americans who disagree with them as the enemy.
FEMA, along with PNAC, gave some wonderfully silly cartoon explanations for how the towers collapsed. This administration seems to love cartoons. PNAC and FEMA, of course, worked together before in the Oklahoma City bombing cover-up. Managing emergencies meant controlling the crime scenes. Their powers would grow, ignoring habeas corpus in the Constitution. They seem more interested in building prisons than aiding victims of disaster. Apparently, aiding disasters is a security issue. They quickly had all the steel from the buildings shipped off to China. Future head of the Department of Homeland Security, Michael Chertoff, who at the time read the Department of Justice's Criminal Investigations Division, had dozens of the Israelis arrested on 9/11, including those filming and celebrating the attacks driving around in vehicles that came from a front from Mossad, deported back to Israel for simple visa violations. Michael Chertoff is a co-author of the U.S. Patriot Act, totalitarian legislation pushed through Congress under the threat of anthrax. Michael Chertoff is the product of a hardline Zionist family. His mother, born in Palestine, now Israel, was a participant in the intelligence operation Magic Carpet. His father was a Zionist rabbi, as was his uncle, and his wife is a leader in the ADL. His first cousin, also the son of a rabbi, is Benjamin Chertoff. Benjamin Chertoff was the editor of Popular Mechanics, the main neocon go-to source to explain 9/11's goofy physics and promote the pancake propaganda. FEMA itself had no explanation for World Trade Center 7, a 42-story building that CNN and the BBC both reported had collapsed before it fell.
We'll leave it there for the moment. We've got some news just coming in, actually, that the Salomon Brothers building in New York, right in the heart of Manhattan, has also collapsed. Many are saying is the worst attack on the country since Pearl Harbor. A huge operation is underway to find survivors from the wreckage of both towers of the World Trade Center in New York. They collapsed after hijacked airliners with passengers on board were flown into them. The 47-story Salomon Brothers building, situated very close to the World Trade Center, has also just collapsed. Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing. And indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were. And it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent, Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. There's almost...
Way to jump the script, guys. The 9/11 Commission's way of dealing with it was to not deal with it. They simply didn't address it in their report. A skyscraper housing offices for the CIA, and more importantly, the Security and Exchange Commission, investigating tens of billions of dollars in corporate fraud going up in smoke isn't something you just ignore and skip. It looked rather stupid without Flight 93 reaching its final destination for Building 7, but they had to do it anyway. There have been whistleblowers, of course, even from within FEMA, photographers who are now in exile. But who do they turn to? They can't go to the government with it, and they certainly can't go to the mainstream media with it. So if you're asking why don't more people come forward, how exactly would you like them to do that? Go to who? And say what? Jet fuel, also known as kerosene, didn't weaken or melt in any of the steel. The mass media claimed that rocket fuel or jet fuel got the temperatures high enough to weaken steel on the truss and have floors collapse one by one like pancakes on top of each other, apparently with no resistance at free fall speeds as well. But here we have a woman standing in a hole next to the truss. She's not burned. She's got a towel or some papers or rag or something she was waving around. Apparently her hair and clothing and the paper or towel that she had in her hand must have been made of the same magic fibers as the passports that didn't burn. Also in Washington, D.C., even though in New York, jet fuel could leave molten steel and metal in the basements of the building and weaken the truss to the degree to drop all their weight, same jet fuel from the same type of airplane couldn't even burn wooden stools, plastic computers, and paper books. That must be it. Things made of paper, like passports and books, don't burn in fire, but metals do. Welcome to Bizarro World Physics. But most people will say what they're paid to, or whatever advances their career. Of course, people have similar conclusions when they begin from a false premise and tons of misinformation. A lot of engineers and scientists parroted the official explanation for faith-based pancake claims and 19 guys led by a man in a cave on a defibrillator. Science is politicized. They got a lot of scientists, at least according to the gerrymandered statistics, to promote the myth of global warming as well. The immediate effect of 9/11, aside from hiding trillions in missing funds and allowing a couple of New York billionaires to collect billions on insurance, and upping the sale of feel-good nationalistic symbols to slap on the back of SUVs, was to create a massive security state and usher in the age of preemptive overt war. The death toll and the price tag of 9/11 would pale in comparison to what was coming. The imperialist neocons had their desired Pearl Harbor to use as psychological clout and emotional blackmail. They would evoke and associate 9/11 and terrorism to their enemies to create perpetual war and rush through draconian legislation. It is a general historical truth that lies lead to other lies. So it is always a good place to start in any investigation into deception to ask the second question after who benefits from the lies, and that is, who is compounding the lies and who is continuing the narrative. When they are one and the same with those who benefit, then you have yourself some suspects. And in the case of government deception, the next question to ask is, who is and had the power to cover it up? And we'll be looking at all of the above, starting with some of the liars. Phase 1 of 9/11 was complete. Phases 2, 3, and 4 would be the Patriot Act, anthrax, and war. So when you find people lying about all of the above, 9/11, anthrax, and targets for war, then that needs to be exposed loud and clear. First, they associated Iraq to 9/11 via a fictitious meeting, and this lie would grow to associate both with anthrax attacks. And that lie would grow into a general lie about chemical and biological weapons, mobile labs, etc., and eventually into a more general lie about weapons of mass destruction, and before you knew it, we were at war again. War is by deception. The source of these lies were Israeli intelligence and a Zionist cabal nestled inside the Bush administration. We'll be going over the PNAC cabal in more detail later, but first we'll look at just some of the lies coming from a couple of PNAC goons, Gary Schmidt and William Crystal. Watch how the master liars weave one deception into the next. William Crystal and Gary Schmidt both wrote pieces called Iraq Al-Qaeda Connection, trying to link Iraq to Al-Qaeda. Gary Schmidt referred to Fred Barnes from the Weekly Standard, saying that the Czechs had given him a photograph of Atta meeting in Prague with Iraqi officials. They kept repeating this line again about the Prague meeting between Muhammad Atta and Iraqis. Fred Barnes wrote a piece called Muhammad Atta Was Here, in which he accused the meeting of happening and having photographic evidence for it, as well as alluding that the Iraqis may have passed biological, chemical, or even nuclear weapons to Al-Qaeda. Of course, no such photo existed, because Atta was never there, and the Iraqis had no biological or chemical weapons to give. But this Zionist cabal would not be the only ones to try and make these claims. The Israelis would also do so, which we will cover later. It is clear that Israeli firsters within the U.S. falsely linked Iraq to the 9/11 attacks. This would be done so again in the letters for the anthrax attacks, which were also initially blamed on Al-Qaeda, which read Death to America and Death to Israel. I think you can start to see the clear picture coming around here. This isn't simply a case of the Israelis using a crisis to their advantage. Israeli Mossad agents were living next door to Muhammad Atta. They knew very well what was about to happen. The military-industrial complex is multinational. Regional privateer cells comprise an international ring of rent-a-terrorists for the continuity of government, and this is where the missing money is. Key players in the U.S. had legislation pre-written ready to push through Congress the moment after the crisis began. Karl Rove once professed that it didn't matter what reality was because they could make reality. And that's exactly what they did and what they rephrased as message force multipliers, an old tactic borrowed from Nazi propaganda about repeating a lie enough times until the most prejudiced or insecure among the populace start to believe it. If they can get 5 or 6 people to repeat the same lines in different places in the press, regardless of how lacking in evidence the claims are, it will create the perception that everybody is saying X, so X must be true. This lemming effect works particularly well with scare tactics, and it is used over and over by the mass media as a form of deception or distraction. Here is who all kept repeating the Iraq is with Al-Qaeda lie, as well as the compounding lies that they merged with it. Once again, not a shred of evidence to back any of this up. Pure scare tactics. Same as the Iran is going to build a nuclear bomb propaganda. These monstrous lies were told by embedded Zionist journalists who worked with the administration's PNAC members. For example, the lie that the lead hijacker 9/11, Muhammad Atta, met with agents of Saddam was repeated by William Safire of the New York Times, May 9, 2002, which came from Gary Schmidt, who wrote it in 2001 for PNAC in the Weekly Standard run by William Crystal, the chairman of PNAC. The story was leaked to Rutgers on September 18, 2001, just 7 days after the attacks. Wow, they knew about the lead hijacker as well as a meeting that never took place within 7 days. Reminds me of the BBC report on Iraq that was plagiarized from a college student in Florida. This Atta met with an Iraqi official lie was repeated by Dick Cheney on national television December 9, 2001. He later denied it in spite of being on tape saying it.
You have said in the past that it was, quote, pretty well confirmed.
No, I never said that.
Okay.
I never
think
said
that is...
No, it's absolutely not. What I said was, it's been pretty well confirmed that he did go to Prague and he did meet with a senior official of the Iraqi intelligence service in Czechoslovakia last.
So ignorantly called the Czech Republic by its old name, Czechoslovakia. One would think that if they had a report, which they had read, out of a country, that they would at least know the correct name for that country, but he didn't.
In Czechoslovakia.
What's sad is Cheney's considered to be one of the smarter ones, and he is, for a neocon. I mean, the competition isn't fierce. Gary Schmidt of PNAC wrote, Shortly before getting on a plane to fly to New Jersey from Europe in June 2000, Mohammed Atta, the lead hijacker of the first jet airliner to slam into the World Trade Center, and apparently the lead conspirator in the attacks of September 11th, met with a senior Iraqi official. This was no chance encounter. Rather than take a flight from Germany where he had been living, Atta traveled to Prague, almost certainly for the purpose of meeting with the Iraqi intelligence operative Ahmed Samir Ami. This was a complete lie designed to connect Iraq to Al-Qaeda and to the 9/11 attacks. It was false. Yet all the networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, Fox, repeated it anyway because it had been in the New York Times. The source for the Times reports were members of the Iraqi National Congress, such as Ahmed Shalabi, a man convicted of bank fraud, and the person who Wolfowitz had personally suggested should lead the INC back in the 90s, when he wrote then-President Clinton about regime change. William Safire, who made the bogus report, was awarded a Guardian of Zion Award in 2005 for his defense of Zionism in Israel. He also got the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Bush in 2006. It's their way of saying, good job. What the neocons were doing is planting stories from known false sources on willing journalists and then quoting them as sources for what was in reality their own lies to begin with. In this triangle, the Office of Special Plans told the INC what to say, and then the journalists claimed them as sources, and then the Pentagon quoted the journalists. Of course, the Prince of Darkness was a message force multiplier. December 28, 2001, in an op-ed in the New York Times, Richard Pearl wrote, "We must strike Iraq. Evidence of a meeting in Prague between a senior Iraqi intelligence agent and Mohammed Atta, the September 11th ringleader, is convincing." Another PNAC troll, Paul Wolfowitz, added, "Like the meeting of Mohammed Atta with Iraqi officials in Prague, I think the premise of a policy has to be we can't afford to wait for proof beyond a reasonable doubt." February 23, 2002, in the San Francisco Chronicle. Pearl was the chairman of the Defense Policy Board in the DoD and involved in too many other criminal activities to get into just yet. Paul Wolfowitz was the Deputy Secretary of Defense and later the head of the World Bank, and also involved in too many crimes to get into just yet. They can get away with it. It's like they want to be caught. They are laughing at you. For those of you who actually need to see the lies about weapons of mass destruction that the mainstream media and the neocons repeated over and over, I will give you this rather famous YouTube clip.
There are a lot of people who lie and get away with it. And that we will in fact find weapons or evidence of weapons programs that are conclusive.
I don't think we'll discover anything myself. It appears that there were not weapons of mass destruction there.
You said you knew where they were.
I did not. We know where they are. They're in the area around Tikrit and Baghdad and east, west, south, and north. Well, first of all, I haven't lied.
There are a lot of people who lie and get away with it.
Talking about lies and your allegation that there was bulletproof evidence of ties between Al-Qaeda and Iraq. Was that a lie?
Intelligence gathered by this and other governments leaves no doubt that the Iraqi regime continues to possess and conceal some of the most lethal weapons ever devised.
Our people are going to find out the truth, and the truth will say that this intelligence is good intelligence, no doubt in my mind.
I don't know anybody that I can think of who has contended that the Iraqis had nuclear weapons.
And we believe he has in fact reconstituted nuclear weapons.
Saddam Hussein is determined to get his hands on a nuclear bomb.
We cannot wait for the final proof. He's got him. He's got him. The smoking gun. He's got him. That could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Colin Powell didn't lie.
My colleagues, every statement I make today is backed up by sources, solid sources. These are not assertions. What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence.
He has not developed any significant capability with respect to weapons of mass destruction. He is unable to project conventional power against his neighbors.
Saddam Hussein aids and protects terrorists, including members of Al-Qaeda. Secretly and without fingerprints, he could provide one of his hidden weapons to terrorists or help them develop their own. What did Iraq have to do with what?
The attack on the World Trade Center.
Nothing.
He said there were three main reasons for going to war in Iraq. Weapons of mass destruction.
Saddam Hussein has gone to elaborate lengths, spent enormous sums, taken great risks to build and keep weapons of mass destruction.
The claim that Iraq was sponsoring terrorists who had attacked us on 9/11.
Before September the 11th, many in the world believed that Saddam Hussein could be contained.
And that Iraq had purchased nuclear materials from Niger.
The regime is seeking a nuclear bomb.
All three of those turned out to be false.
First, just if I might correct a misperception, I don't think we ever said, at least I know I didn't say, that there was a direct connection between September the 11th and Saddam Hussein.
Who does the president think he's effing kidding?
Of course, it was information that was mistaken.
There are a lot of people who lie and get away with it.
Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere. Nope, no weapons over there. Maybe under here.
When you have a precedent set like that, and you have somebody, George Tenet, acknowledging in his book that he knew that the administration was deceiving the American people into a situation that is murdering young men and women from this country and others, that George Tenet and Dick Cheney and Condoleezza Rice and George Bush et al. Should be in fucking jail.
I'm tired of hell, and I'm not going to take this anymore.
You got to figure out what to do with all of the debris.
How about you? You made money off the Gulf War, and now you're going to vote for your fascist son. Old lie, war lie, still lie, stop the lie, stop the war.
Andrew Carr Jr.
It is important step.
Would you be charged for treason? Do not, you son of a bitch!
Also working with William Safire at the New York Times was Judith Miller. She made up the lie about Iraq's aluminum tubes allegedly being used as centrifuges in a nuclear reactor. Never mind the fact that that wouldn't physically work anyway if it was true. That doesn't seem to matter. I already explained to you that these people aren't very bright. But they don't worry about that, you see. They know that it doesn't really matter how bad their lies are. They're going to be accepted anyway because their entire role is to just facilitate some sort of pretext for war. Miller was also the journalist that spread the lies about Saddam having weapons of mass destruction under his palaces or in mobile trucks. And her boyfriend, Louis Libby, Cheney's chief of staff, compounded that lie, as well as lies about Iraq's alleged anthrax. 9/11 was the new Pearl Harbor event the neocons yearned for, and it was 9/11 that acted as the catalyst for both war and sweeping pre-written legislation to create a security panic state, which stripped away civil liberties and constitutional rights for the sake of the military-industrial complex. It's important to look at the events before, during, and after 9/11 in order to understand it. It is also important to look at who was chosen to investigate it. Two huge bills were created which have forever changed America: the Patriot Act and the creation of the Department of Homeland Security. The Congress passed these monsters while it was under the duress of an anthrax attack. At the time, the politicians and the mass media pinned the anthrax attack on Al-Qaeda. The notes from whoever sent it read, "Death to America, death to Israel," automatically generating sympathy for Israel's struggle. Israel, a brutal apartheid regime, was linked to America's enemies. One lie led to another. First, Al-Qaeda was behind the anthrax attack, and then 2 more lies were created to connect Al-Qaeda to Iraq and Iraq to 9/11. The mainstream press never asked for evidence of the claims being made. They just repeated them obediently and blindly. Some were even dumb enough to take the Israelis at their word, as if Israel has never lied to the United States and would have no motive to implicate its enemies with such a tale. The London Times reported that the Iraqis were seen passing anthrax to Al-Qaeda. Their sources, Israeli intelligence. Here we can see the beginnings of setup. With this lie, they connected 9/11 to Iraq. There was no meeting in Prague. There were no Iraqis passing anthrax to hijackers. There were no Iraqis even talking to hijackers. Next, Iraq was said to be making biological weapons of mass destruction, including anthrax, in mobile weapons labs. This lie came from Judith Miller of the New York Times, the girlfriend of the lawyer for the Mossad, Louis Libby. Here's a woman who tried to blame both the 1993 World Trade Center attack as well as the Oklahoma City bombing on Iraqis. She claimed that Iraq was using mobile weapons labs to hide its biological weapons of mass destruction and was capable of producing anthrax. Judith Miller was also a journalist who got a hoax letter of anthrax. It's interesting because the first set of these hoax letters were postmarked by the real attackers before there was reporting on the anthrax. So why send Judith Miller and Fox News pretend attacks? And yet the attackers sent real anthrax to others who opposed the Patriot Act and the war. The formula is simple. 1. State Al-Qaeda attacked the U.S. with anthrax. 2. State Iraq has biological and chemical weapons of mass destruction, including anthrax. 3. State that Al-Qaeda met with Iraq. 4. State that Iraq gave anthrax to Al-Qaeda. All of these statements are lies. But it leaves the public with the conclusion that Iraq and Al-Qaeda were working together. Now, did Osama bin Laden set all that up? No. Osama bin Laden is dead. Later, neocons involved in the American-Turkish Council and the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee were fingered in illegal black market weapons trades, including nuclear material. Sybil Edmonds, the translator for the FBI, had the state secrets privilege enacted on her as a gag order. Every step has been taken to silence investigation, information, and legal action into these crimes. AIPAC was also caught spying on the United States, again. One of its moles, Larry Franklin, who was sentenced to 12 years in jail, was involved with the Niger forgeries, a bit of nuclear weapons propaganda which fit nicely with Judith Miller's tubes myth.
The British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa.
If you don't know already, if you've been living in a cave or getting all your news from TV, these forgers were so bad that they didn't even fake the right name on the documents, and ignorantly used the name of an obsolete foreign minister who had not been in power for over a decade. It would be the equivalent of trying to pass off a modern document today and signing it Ronald Reagan, which is not even possible. This bogus information was used anyway, despite being debunked immediately, even by our own CIA. They knew it wasn't true. The CIA is evil, but they're not stupid. But it didn't matter, and they knew it wasn't going to matter. The press never took the 20 seconds or so that I just did to explain this, with the exception of Bill Moyers on PBS. All in one, you see the imperialists' intentional deception and sloppiness with the media's yes-man partnership. They can't claim incompetence when they're the ones faking the documents, and the media can't claim ignorance when they will not report on the matter even after the fact. They lie to you together. The mass media is just a pro-war PR machine for the Pentagon. Franklin worked for Douglas Feith in the DoD, a dual citizen with Israel who met with uncleared Israeli generals in his office in the build-up to the Iraq War. Fife with Pearl set up something called IAI, the International Advisors Incorporated, in Turkey, to act as a miniature ATC. Fife was a sole shareholder. It is essentially just another bubble to profiteer through. It's odd how the U.S. wrongly points his finger at Iraq, and even Iran, accusing them of building nuclear weapons, and yet the real criminals trading nuclear secrets and possibly nuclear material are right here in our own government. Our Undersecretary of State and former ambassador to Turkey, Mark Grossman, is implicated in just such a crime. And even though he'd been caught red-handed with these dealings with the Turks and the Israelis, nothing could be done about it because the whistleblowers were gagged. To quote an old write-up from Justin Raimondo, one of the best muckrakers out there, immediately after 9/11, the FBI arrested a bunch of people suspected of being involved with the attacks, including 4 associates of key targets of FBI counterintelligence operations. Sibel heard the targets tell Mark Grossman, "We need to get them out of the U.S. because we can't afford them to spill the beans." Grossman duly facilitated their release from jail, and the suspects immediately left the country without further investigation or interrogation. That's the number 3 man at the State Department facilitating the immediate release of 9/11 suspects at the request of targets of the FBI's investigation. He's sourcing the Sunday Times, the same paper that Mordecai Vanunu turned to break the story about Israel's secret nuclear arsenal. Unfortunately, Vanunu landed in jail for that. It would be Mark Grossman who warned his associates to stay away from Brewster Jennings' a front for the CIA, particularly the wing that Valerie Plame was working for, which worked on tracking nuclear weapons proliferation. This became more public knowledge when Novak and Louis Libby told the world to stay away from Brewster Jennings and associates by ousting Valerie Plame as a covert agent. By ousting her, it was easy to deduce that the company she worked for must have been a front, and thus all of the CIA agents working for that were gone. They're pointing the finger at Iraq and Iran, but we know which country in the Middle East secretly has nukes. We know which cabal within the United States is selling this information on the black market, and it's in our own government. It's Fife and Pearl and Grossman and the same PNAC Zionist traitors that have led to the war in Iraq, helped cover it up in Niger, ousted Valerie Plame, and blackmailed politicians for their own financial interest. And who were the end buyers for these nuclear secrets? General Mahmoud Ahmed, the same man who wired $100,000 to 9/11 hijacker Mohammed Atta, who I've just explained was an Israeli agent. And from the general, it would pass on to AQ Khan, and from there to all the black markets, I assume to the highest bidders. Not only were they selling nuclear secrets, they were also selling hooking points, soft spots for blackmail, to manipulate U.S. officials. Sibel Edmonds made valid complaints about a colleague who was leaking information illegally. Sibel gets gagged and released from her position, but the woman she complained about turns out to be the daughter of an official who worked for the general. And what happened to the other leakers? Well, Robert Novak would die, Louis Libby would have a trial, be convicted, found guilty, and then Bush just commuted his sentence anyway. It's a little ironic that Louis Libby gets his sentence commuted by George Bush when Louis Libby was the lawyer for the Mossad agent Mark Rich, who got a pardon from President Clinton for his role in Iran-Contra, illegal money laundering, and not paying his taxes. You know, it could really come full circle here with Rich's partner Pinky Screen in the DynCorp sex scandal, but I just don't have enough time to get into all that. That would take a whole separate movie. Sibel's 3-hour interview report in a SIF facility for the 9/11 Commission was redacted, and I'd say about 98% of it completely censored. She may as well have been talking to the wall, because none of that information was shared. They just wanted to know what she knew. Oddly, a male hooker, Jeff Gannon, who Karl Rove brought in, who was pretending to be a reporter for a fake news agency, Talon News, referenced internal government memos about the Plame affair before they were made public. This is a male hooker spending the night at the White House. I wonder how he got access to that information. And where was the ISI's general on 9/11? He was having breakfast at Capitol Hill with the director of the CIA, Porter Goss, and also Bob Graham from Florida, the senator for the Senate Intelligence Committee. Around the same time, Osama bin Laden's brother was having breakfast with George Bush's father to discuss business deals. George Bush Jr. was in Florida reading a book to some kids. Apparently this book had a little television inside of it which magically had the first plane hitting the towers on it, because Bush claimed not once but twice that he saw the first plane hit. That was impossible because coverage of the first plane hitting didn't air on the day of 9/11. It came after, when they found the French filmmakers who caught the attack serendipitously.
My chief of staff, well, first of all, when we walked in the classroom, I had seen this plane fly into the first building. There was a TV set on, and you know, I thought it was pilot error.
It's almost as if he had rehearsed what to say and then royally messed it up.
I was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go in, and I saw an airplane hit the tower of a TV. You know, the TV was obviously on, and I used to fly myself, and I said, well, there's one terrible pilot. And
why didn't the Secret Service react after the second plane hit to get the president out of his publicly announced location if they were so worried about terrorism? And where was Mr. Dick? Dick Cheney was in a PEOC bunker making damn sure the next plane hit its target. Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta recounts.
During the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the vice president, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the vice president, do the orders still stand? And the vice president turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Well, at the time I didn't know what all that meant. And
the flight you're referring to is the
flight that came into the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Did Cheney order a stand down or a shoot down? Considering that he tries to lie about his whereabouts, and the little fact that the Pentagon was hit, shows that the order wasn't a shoot down, and the young man wouldn't be questioning the orders or quoting the miles either if it were. The 9/11 cover-up or commission will claim that Dick Cheney didn't arrive at the Presidential Emergency Office Center until 9:58 a.m. They can't take a later timestamp than that because we have a photograph of all of them at 9:59 when the First World Trade Center was collapsing. This is a half hour after Mineta overheard the conversation about the plane being 50 miles out. This would place Dick Cheney there after the Pentagon had been struck. And they will claim the conversation about 50 miles out and 10 miles out was about Flight 93, not Flight 77. There's a big problem with that. If they were talking about Flight 93 was never 50 miles away, much less 10 miles out. Flight 93 went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, which is a hell of a lot further than 10 miles from D.C. Norman Mineta arrived at 9:20, and Cheney and Rice were already there. Richard Clarke, the terrorism czar, stated in his book Against All Enemies that he arrived at 9:03, just as the second plane had hit the World Trade Center, and shortly after, certainly before 9:58, went into the Presidential Emergency Office Center to find that Cheney and Rice were already there, and recalls that later Mineta arrives at around 9:20 because they were looking for him. That means that Cheney was there between 9:03 and 9:20, if not earlier. White House photographer David Burrow would tell Peter Jennings at ABC News that shortly after 9, the Secret Service came to Cheney's office and said, "Sir, you have to come with us." And Cheney himself said on Meet the Press on September 16, 2001, "When I arrived there in short order, we had word the Pentagon had been hit." So that's 3 eyewitnesses plus Cheney himself confirming that Cheney was there before the Pentagon was hit. Of course, the White House photographer and the Vice President gave these accounts before the Mineta testimony to the 9/11 Commission. Also, Condoleezza Rice and the Commission claimed that she arrived there shortly after Cheney. It would be an extremely narrow window for Rice to arrive after Cheney after 9:58. And yet all of them are there for the photograph at 9:59 of the World Trade Center collapsing. There is no way she had all those conversations with Clarke and the principals within those seconds. Dick Cheney and Lee Hamilton are liars, no shock there. and the 9/11 Commission would delete Norman Mineta's testimony from their video archives. However, we recorded it from C-SPAN. It wasn't just moles in the State Department and DoD impeding the FBI's investigation into 9/11 suspects. The FBI was impeding the FBI's investigation into 9/11. It's a stretch, but one could still claim that maybe they're just trying to cover up for their embarrassing failure and screw-ups to save face. Except that there is absolutely no rationalization in the world to explain why the FBI went to Ames, Iowa and destroyed all the Ames anthrax samples. I'll let you hear the words of Francis Boyle from an interview on Boiling Frogs, the man who drafted the Biological Anti-Terrorism Act of 1989, Harvard Law professor, etc. And I have never talked to this man, but he is coming up with the same conclusion.
Get an updated list from the CIA. And he said, well, we were working with people at Fort Detrick on this matter. And I said, well, Fort Detrick could very well be the problem here, not the solution. Soon thereafter, within a few weeks, the FBI authorized the destruction of the United States government's collection of Ames strain anthrax maintained out in Ames, Iowa. Mm-hmm. And that I was originally hired here to teach criminal law. That clearly was an obstruction of justice. That you would be able to take those Ames strains and reconstruct precisely who was involved in this this attack. So it became very clear to me that the FBI, right from the get-go, was involved in a cover-up here of who really was behind the anthrax attacks. Then basically the FBI has been lying about it and covering it up. I don't believe Ivins did it. Even the people who work with him don't believe he did it. And by the way, I should also point out, Bowman was the same FBI guy who sabotaged the request by the FBI agents in Minneapolis, Rowley and the rest of them, to get a subpoena into Moussaoui's computer. He was the exact same guy.
That's right.
And Bowman had been ordered by someone to sabotage that subpoena into Moussaoui's computer. The argument that the FISA court, there wasn't enough evidence, that is total baloney. If you study everything about Moussaoui, there was more than enough evidence for the FISA court to issue a FISA warrant into his computer. Later on, then, Bowman was promoted and given an award. If we find out, who was really behind the anthrax attacks, perhaps we'll find out who really was behind 9/11.
The anthrax is key. This connected Iraq to Al-Qaeda, and it's the reason many well-intentioned Americans signed up to fight Iraq, believing that they attacked America.
But here you have the Johnny Appleseed of terrorism wandering the country with his little sack of anthrax. 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 Anthrax.
Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax. Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax. Anthrax.
Anthrax.
Anthrax. Anthrax.
Anthrax bacterium.
Anthrax bacterium.
Anthrax investigation. Anthrax investigation.
Anthrax exposure.
Anthrax exposure. Anthrax tests. Anthrax tests with anthrax scares.
Anthrax scares.
Anthrax spores. Anthrax spores. Anthrax strains. Anthrax strains. Anthrax hoax. Anthrax hoaxes.
Anthrax attack.
Anthrax attacks.
Cases of anthrax.
Anthrax case.
Anthrax cases and traces.
Traces of anthrax. Traces of anthrax. Traces of anthrax. Skin anthrax.
Skin anthrax.
Cutaneous anthrax.
Cutaneous case of anthrax.
Inhaled anthrax. Inhaled anthrax.
Inhalation anthrax.
Inhalation anthrax.
Inhalation anthrax. Inhalation anthrax.
Anthrax in the mail.
Anthrax through the mail.
Anthrax tainted letters. Anthrax tainted letters.
Anthrax laced letters.
Anthrax laced letters. Anthrax letters. Anthrax letters.
Anthrax letters.
Anthrax letters.
Presence of anthrax. No presence of anthrax.
Positive for anthrax.
Negative for anthrax.
Negative for anthrax.
Positive for anthrax.
Also has anthrax.
But not anthrax.
I don't have anthrax.
He does not have anthrax.
No anthrax. Crop dusted Omaha with anthrax. Mass spreading of anthrax.
Mutant
potent anthrax,
Deadly anthrax.
Kill any anthrax.
Anthrax fighting drug.
antibiotics,
Antibiotics.
Antibiotics.
antibiotics, anthrax vaccine,
Smallpox vaccine.
That's right, he said smallpox.
Smallpox vaccine.
That's right, he said smallpox.
Back to anthrax. Cure for anthrax.
die from anthrax,
Cure for anthrax.
die from anthrax.
This was the ammo the U.S. used to frighten its own Congress and scare the United Nations. One must remember at this time, the mass media had the public whipped up into a frenzy, scrambling for duct tape and storing food supplies. The press made an attack seem imminent, and the sloganeering for jack-off missile Johnny types became, "We gotta get them over there before they get us here." Colin Powell made his case to the UN while using a vial of mock anthrax.
Secretary of State Colin Powell will make the case for war in a speech to the United Nations.
We also have satellite photos that indicate that banned materials have recently been moved from a number of Iraqi weapons of mass destruction facilities.
Powell will put America's credibility and his own on the line.
So he came through the door that morning and he had in his hand a sheaf of papers, and he said, "This is what I've got to present at the United Nations according to the White House, and you need to look at it."
Colonel Larry Wilkerson, Colin Powell's longtime friend and advisor, was his chief of staff.
It was anything but an intelligence document. It was, as some people characterized it later, sort of a Chinese menu from which you could pick and choose.
At the CIA, Powell and his aides questioned, point by point, the menu of charges drafted by the White House.
There was no way the Secretary of State was going to read off a script about serious matters of intelligence that could lead to war when the script was basically unsourced.
For 4 days and 4 nights, in the conference room next to Tenet's office, they argue over the intelligence.
Secretary Powell asked a lot of questions, expressed skepticism about some, was reassured about others. If he was deeply skeptical, it came out. If we were deeply skeptical, it came out.
And then he turned to the DCI, Mr. Tenet, and he said, everything here, you stand behind. And Mr. Tenet said, "Absolutely, Mr. Secretary." And he said, "Well, you know you're going to be sitting behind me tomorrow. You're going to be sitting right behind me, in camera."
What we're giving you are facts and conclusions based on solid intelligence.
For more than an hour, Secretary Powell displays photos, holds up a chemical vial that suggests anthrax, shows slides, all to make dozens of claims about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction.
I am no expert on centrifuge tubes, but just as an old Army trooper, I can tell you a couple of things.
Every single thing we knew was thrown into that speech. This is all we got, and we're making these firm judgments.
One of the most worrisome things that emerges from the thick intelligence file we have on Iraq's biological weapons is the existence of mobile production facilities used to make biological agents.
He makes a dramatic accusation. Saddam has bioweapons labs mounted on trucks that would be almost impossible to find.
We have first-hand descriptions of
In fact,
biological
Secretary
weapons
Powell was not told that one of the sources he was given as a source of this information had indeed been flagged by the Defense Intelligence Agency as a liar fabricator.
to find even one of these 18...
Powell was also not told that the prime source, an Iraqi defector codenamed Curveball, had never been debriefed by the CIA.
Maybe the name of the agent wasn't alarming enough. Maybe it should have been Screw Up, or, a lying sack of manure, something like that. But, to know that you're giving the president a ticket to go to war based upon one source, at that point, you want to drag the source in and talk to him yourself.
Curveball is a case of utter irresponsibility and a good example of how decayed the intelligence process has become.
The day before Powell's speech, a CIA skeptic had warned about the defector's reputation as a liar. In an email reply, his superior acknowledges the problem, but adds, "This war is going to happen regardless. The powers that be probably aren't terribly interested in whether Curveball knows what he's talking about."
The United States will not and cannot...
Powell was not told about the email.
Leaving Saddam Hussein in possession of weapons of mass destruction for a few more months or years is not an option. Not in a post-September 11th world.
The speech would turn out to be riddled with misleading allegations, but at the time, the press plays it as an overwhelming success.
He had walked into my office musing, and he said words to the effect of, I wonder how we'll all feel if we put 500,000 troops into Iraq and march from one corner of the country to the other and find nothing.
I will forever be known as the one who made the case, Colin Powell now says. I have to live with that.
I look back on it and I still say it's the lowest point in my life. I wish I had not been involved in it.
March 19th, 2003, the aerial bombardment of Iraq begins. It is the first preemptive war on this scale in U.S. history.
Interestingly, the bogus speech Powell was suckered into delivering was originally written up by none other than Cheney's chief of staff and plain scandal fame and convicted criminal Louis Libby. The speech was rewritten by George Tenet, which is about like crawling out of the pot and into the kettle. The neocons assured Powell of its sources and evidence to back up the claims, and Powell, in one evening, ruined his years of hard-earned credibility by trusting them. This anthrax attack and its associated claims, which led to a war, was not an act done in a bubble. This was a carefully calculated event. This was not just some individual trying to profit. The war, the Patriot Act, and the Department of Homeland Security greatly relied on this event. The History Channel will now admit that the anthrax was U.S.-made and came from inside.
Within weeks, 5 would be dead and thousands of others exposed to one of the deadliest bacteria known to man.
There are very few people who have the bench skills to make a product this good.
Federal investigators discovered clues to the perpetrator's identity encoded in the bacterium itself.
There are 89 different types of anthrax, but each one has its own kind of trail. This one led directly back to our own defense establishment.
Was the U.S. government hiding a terrorist inside America's biodefense community? Some say yes, and that the official government investigation was a sham.
The only people who know anything about the subject are also the suspects.
They protected this individual.
What we're dealing with here is an inside job with a real insider who has secrets that nobody wants to get out. It's going to be too humiliating, too embarrassing.
All the spores were sent for immediate forensic testing. By the 10th of October, the analysis of the spores was complete. The results were horrifying. The bacterium that killed Robert Stevens and eventually infected 7 of his colleagues was identified as the Ames strain, a strain long favored by and under the near total control of the U.S. biodefense program.
In August 2008, finally a member of the mass media, Keith Olbermann, admits and clarifies for the public that the anthrax was not from Al-Qaeda.
Evening. This is Friday, August 1st, 95 days until the 2008 presidential election. To that topic presently. First, if reporting by the Los Angeles Times today is even remotely accurate, the questions about the anthrax attacks, which terrified this nation late in 2001, would seem tonight to have boiled down to 3. First, was the anthrax sent by just one employee of our own government or more than one employee of our own government? Was it incompetence or a cover-up? And third, how, if there was evidence of something askew at our biological warfare lab in Maryland as early as December 2001, why did national news organizations in this country receive supposedly reliable leaks from the Bush administration that the anthrax had originated in Iraq? Our 5th story in the countdown, there is finally a suspect in the anthrax attacks. He worked for the government's anthrax lab, and unfortunately he's dead as of this past Tuesday. His name was Dr. Bruce E. Ivins. The Los Angeles Times reporting this morning, NBC News confirming tonight, that the Justice Department was preparing to file criminal charges against him for the 2001 anthrax attacks.
Let me explain the anthrax attacks with a cartoon I made, because I think it's very confusing to pin this down without visual aid. On September 18th, 2 anthrax letters were mailed. Both came from New Jersey. One had the Death to America and Death to Israel letter inside of it, and it was addressed to Tom Brokaw of NBC. This wouldn't be opened until October 12th. The other letter was sent to a New York Post editor and would not be opened until October 17th. 2 days later, still without any letters having been opened yet, on September 20th, 3 letters were mailed. 2 of them were hoax letters sent from Florida. One was to Howard Troxler, and the other was to Judith Miller. Troxler opened his on October 9th, Miller opened hers on October 12th. These were hoax letters. However, the letter inside, the written letter inside, had the same rhetoric as the second letter to Tom Brokaw. The second letter to Tom Brokaw also came on September 20th and was opened on October 5th. On September 26th, still, no letters have been opened, no reports have been made. Philip Zach, somebody who got caught stealing anthrax from a lab in Maryland, sends a letter to the Justice Department blaming Ayad Assad. That letter is opened on October 2nd. How this person knew about anthrax attacks and who to blame it on is a mystery, because there hadn't been any reporting on the anthrax attacks yet. Also on October 2nd, the Patriot Act is introduced, and it is opposed by Senator Daschle and Senator Leahy, who are in position to prevent it from passing. Leahy is the chairman of the Judicial Committee and can block the bill. Daschle is also in a position to block the bill. Daschle and Leahy opposed the Patriot Act on October 6th, and sometime between October 6th and 9th, we can't be sure because the 7th was Sunday and the 8th was Columbus Day, anthrax was mailed to Tom Daschle and Patrick Leahy, and it was the deadliest anthrax so far and meant to kill them. Daschle would open his letter on October 15th, and Leahy's, because it was misrouted, would not be opened until November. At least one other anthrax letter had been mailed about September 21st or 23rd. They're not sure because it had already been opened and was in the bag of mail and contaminated all the rest of the letters, so they don't have a clear postmark. Around that date, it gets opened in October 3rd, causes several people to get sick, and on October 4th, Robert Stephen dies from anthrax, the first person to die from anthrax in the U.S. since the 1970s. And on October 5th, it is reported in the news. This is the first report in the news about the anthrax. James Woolsey, Judith Miller, Gary Schmidt, Robert Kagan, William Crystal will all be blaming it on Iraq. On October 15th, John McCain will go on David Letterman, associating Iraq to Al-Qaeda. The anthrax hoax letters, which helped cause a panic, can't be considered a copycat attack. The news reports about the original anthrax letters came on October 12th and 13th. But NBC News got a hoax letter which was mailed September 20th, and the rest had been sent between October 5th and 9th, long before the public news about the anthrax. It is interesting that they were mailed from the same states as Al-Qaeda's hijackers. Did someone know ahead of time where they were? The letters did read Allah is great and death to Israel. They came on the heels of 9/11, so naturally people assumed it was Al-Qaeda. Then anthrax or hoax anthrax was sent from Florida and New Jersey, just miles from where Al-Qaeda was based. Is this the work of a lone scientist? Who would benefit? Who else was located in both places and has a reputation for false flag terrorism? The Israeli Mossad.
Evidence linking these Israelis to 911 is classified. I cannot tell you about evidence that has been gathered. It's classified information.
They have the means, the motive, and they were there. Israel was actually caught less than a year later in 2002 creating a fake Al-Qaeda cell. Mike Rivera of WhatReallyHappened.com has reported on this in detail. PNAC's Weekly Standard helped jumpstart the Iraq-made anthrax myth after relying heavily on a report on ABC by Brian Ross. Brian Ross's sources also claim that Hezbollah, Hamas, and Al-Qaeda were all working together. A few months later, Israel was busted with their fake Al-Qaeda cell in Palestine, trying to make the claims that Hamas and Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah, all of Israel's enemies, were working together.
Yeah. We had reports that Hamas and Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda had tried to hook up together in Beirut and were sharing ideas and thoughts.
This was when? Like
this was in March of this year. But there was a growing kind of alliance. Now, those three groups don't really like each other. They have their own agendas.
They have different missions, you know.
Absolutely.
Hezbollah
different
in Lebanon, and Hamas is in
exactly. And you know, Hamas and Hezbollah, there's no record they've ever tried to attack in this country. Al-Qaeda, yes.
How about Iraq? Or, suppose, I mean, you can't do this.
The first newspaper to report the Iraq anthrax connections was the New York Observer on October 14, 2001. The New York Observer is owned by Charles Kushner's son. Charles Kushner, of course, went to jail for sexually blackmailing his own sister. He was also who paid for and brought in the Israeli national who was sleeping with and blackmailing Governor McGreevey of New Jersey. Now, why would a paper whose owner's father was a Jewish billionaire helping to sexually blackmail the governor and place an Israeli national as head of security be the first paper in America to first report Iraq sent anthrax is beyond chance. Why Israel had a mole as the head of security in a state they had a major spy operation in, as well as a Mossad front filming 9/11 and where the first anthrax is mailed, is worth more than a few questions. The Observer made its report on October 14th. The following day, the information about Iraq and anthrax had already spread quickly through the Bush administration. The paper wasn't the only one to claim Iraq may have connections to the anthrax. October 15th, the next day, John McCain on David Letterman.
How are things going in Afghanistan now?
I think we're doing fine. I think we've removed what little anti-aircraft capability they have. These C-130 gunships are pretty awesome weapons of war, and I believe that the Taliban will be removed. I think we'll get him and his people. I think the
Lieutenant of
helicopters are vulnerable too, but I think we'll do fine. The second phase, if I could just make it very quickly, the second phase is Iraq. If I could just make it very quickly, the second phase is Iraq. There is some indication, and I don't have the conclusions, but some of this anthrax may, and I emphasize may, have come from Iraq.
Oh, is that right?
If that may be the case, then that's when some tough decisions are going to have to be made too.
Let me just finish.
Some of this anthrax may, and I emphasize may, have come from Iraq.
Oh, is that right?
Like the last suspect, Stephen Hatfield, the Justice Department can't place Bruce Ivins at the scenes of the crime, but that never seems to bother them. Was this one guy? Did Ivins try to set up Al-Qaeda all by himself? Was it Ivins who said he witnessed anthrax being transferred from Iraq to Al-Qaeda? Did he just find out where the Al-Qaeda cells were and he raced down to both locations and mailed anthrax from there and sent these letters saying death to America and Israel? And it's just a coincidence that Israelis had illegal spy rings in both locations? Was one guy zinging back and forth between New Jersey and Florida to set up Al-Qaeda and ultimately Iraq? Or was it a team, perhaps an intelligence agency of a country with powerful biological weapons, perhaps one with cells in Florida and New Jersey, very near to the said Al-Qaeda hijackers of 9/11 implicated in the notes and the mailing locations? A hoax anthrax letter was also mailed to NBC News from Florida, September 20th, just 2 days after anthrax had been mailed from New Jersey, also to NBC News. It was postmarked September 18th. Thus, these were not copycat attacks. The senders had to have had knowledge of the initial attacks as well as the notes therein. It appeared at first the work of remaining Al-Qaeda cells. Just 2 weeks later, the London Times reports, October 27th, not only did Iraqis meet with Al-Qaeda's Mohammed Atta in Prague, they were also seen giving him a vial of anthrax. Israeli security forces observed the transfer. The author of the London Times piece later had a mysterious death. Mass media quickly seized on an Iraqi anthrax connection as well as an Al-Qaeda connection. It is also easy to see how this complements Judith Miller's stories of biolabs and Cheney's stories about a meeting in Prague, both 100% false. The anthrax mailers had some interesting target choices. The two senators in opposition to the Patriot Act and the press who reported secondary explosions in the World Trade Center. And yet fake anthrax was sent to Judith Miller, the neocons propaganda whore. These were not random victims that helped sell anthrax treatment drugs, and it certainly wasn't in Al-Qaeda's interest. Killing those senators or scaring them into changing their vote would benefit who more? The security state, which had pre-written the bill and already planned the wars, or the lowly lab technician acting all by himself? Of all the possible targets, the two men chosen were Senator Tom Daschle, who opposed the Patriot Act and wanted to create an independent investigation into 9/11. And the other was Senator Leahy of the Leahy Amendment to the FOIA, which, if enforced, would end all military aid to Israel. The anthrax sent to Leahy was the most dangerous. They are made of smaller granules and of uniform size than the Daschle letter, far more powerful than all the other mailings. And according to Newsweek, the anthrax letter to Leahy was coated with a chemical compound unknown to experts who have worked in the field for years. The coating matches no known anthrax samples ever recorded from the biological weapons producers anywhere in the world, including Iraq and the former Soviet Union. The Bush administration was sold on the Iraqi anthrax connection, even when the FBI and the scientific community were not. The window of time was closing. Stephen Hatfield became a person of interest. Two groups went berserk trying to blame him, the JDO and the JDL. Hatfield has since been found innocent, but back in November of 2001, when Hatfield was in England, a hoax anthrax letter was sent to Senator Tom Daschle from the UK at the time when Hatfield was there. Was someone trying to frame him? This was again the same senator who had been sent actual anthrax just a month earlier. One Don Foster of Vanity Fair went out of his way to implicate Hatfield in the anthrax attacks, noting the movements of where Hatfield was, followed by the hoax anthrax letters. Tracing back into the 90s, a letter sent to Benai Britt from Kansas monitored Hatfield's movements, as well as another supposed letter sent from the Washington, D.C. area while he was there, and then another in England while he was there. And yet he wasn't in New Jersey or Florida when those were sent. It is interesting that the anthrax was mailed from the same states and cities as Al-Qaeda's hijacker cells. Did someone know ahead of time where they were? Antiwar.com has at least reported on a portion of the story. The case of the Israeli art students living next door to hijackers is infamous.
What troubles investigators most, particularly in New York in the counterterrorism investigation of the World Trade Center attack, is that on a number of cases, suspects that they had sought to wiretap and surveil immediately changed their telecommunications processes. They started acting much differently as soon as those supposedly secret wiretaps went into place. Brett? But the complaint about this system is that the wiretap computer programs made by Converse have in effect a back door through which wiretaps themselves can be intercepted by unauthorized parties. Adding to the suspicions is the fact that in Israel, Converse works closely with the Israeli government and under special programs gets reimbursed for up to 50% of its research and development costs by the Israeli Ministry of Industry and Trade. But investigators within the DEA, INS, and FBI have all told Fox News that to pursue or even suggest Israeli spying through Converse is considered career suicide.
Here's what happened. The Israeli Mossad gets caught filming the 9/11 event and working for a front company just 3 miles away from the said hijackers in New Jersey. In Florida, it's even worse, with the Israelis living next door to the said hijackers, literally next door to them. But then, the official story starts getting really goofy when you have the reports of one of the hijackers passports magically flying down near ground zero and being found unburned. Apparently we have fire hot enough to weaken steel and make buildings collapse, but not hot enough to burn a paper passport. As if it was an attempt to top that one, they have the claim that Muhammad Atta, the same guy they lied about having a meeting in Prague where he got anthrax, supposedly had a bag with a list of all 19 hijackers' names on it and plans about 9/11, which just so happened to get lost in the luggage and never made it on its final flight. But then the FBI royally goofs up that list because they have a number of hijackers who aren't dead, and they go and backpedal on, oh well, it was some guy with the same name and blah, 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 blah. The story's basically dropped. Robert Mueller, the former director of the FBI, finally told CNN in September of 2002 that, quote, there was no legal proof to prove the identities of the suicidal hijackers. There seems to be a lot of mystery surrounding Muhammad Atta. He's the lead hijacker, dubbed so by the mass media. He was the one used to link Iraq to anthrax unfairly. And then this guy takes a bag with him on his final attack with all the plans in it and all the names of all the hijackers on his final flight, which if discovered would ruin the entire thing. He lived next door to Israeli spies, and he was spotted on the casino ships of Jack Abramoff, a Zionist lobbyist, on September 5th, just 6 days before the attack. That's all interesting. Well, that's not all. He also had Star Trek teleportation powers, apparently, because the guy can be in Florida at 5 o'clock and yet be on a flight to Baltimore at 3 and somehow get back and be drinking in a bar. And I'll give you a link to that so you can read the details here. There have been several Osama bin Laden tapes to hit the news, as well as Al-Qaeda tapes, and these things are fake. They seem to pop up regularly when Bush was up for re-election.
This will assure his followers that A, he's alive and well, he's still in the game, and his followers, Rick, just haven't seen him, and when they do, it's likely to invigorate the movement. He's still very much the inspiration for Al-Qaeda.
How do we know that this thing is legit?
Well, you know, this is being flagged by Al-Sahab, which is Al-Qaeda's media arm, and every other video or audio message that's come out that's been flagged by Al-Sahab has been legit, Rick, so we expect that this one will be too.
One of the bin Laden tapes was so bad that it actually took footage from a film made in 2006 called Road to Guantanamo and passed it off like it was original footage. This made it on all the networks.
And a 2004 video purportedly showing bin Laden, which was exactly identical to a video released in 2007.
After these debunkles, they go to voice-only tapes, but those get debunked as well. But one would think anything supposedly from Osama bin Laden would be under the microscope more than anything else and have more scrutiny than anything else, and yet Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden are on the news multiple times as known fakes.
Adam Gadon, the so-called American Al-Qaeda who proclaimed himself the media maven, if you will, for Al-Qaeda and was helping to produce a lot of these so-called Al-Qaeda videos that were all over the internet that made Al-Qaeda look really bad and made the Muslims look bad.
Should you fail to comply in full, we will deem it sufficient justification to continue to fight and kill Americans.
Come to find out, Adam Gadon's real name was Adam Perlman. And not only was he, in fact, Jewish, he was the grandson of a member of the board of the Anti-Defamation League. And if you've been following the history of the Anti-Defamation League, you will find out they've been very much involved in covertly supporting a lot of these so-called American Nazi movements. In fact, all the way back, just about the time of World War II, there was this scandal where the head of the American Nazi Party, which had a total membership of like 6, and yet they were getting all this press, was arrested for embezzling from his sponsors, which turned out to be the ADL, so that kind of blew up in their faces. So anyway, we have Adam Perlman, and he's been going around saying, I'm Al-Qaeda, I'm Al-Qaeda, see, I got a turban on my head, I'm a terrible Muslim, gotta hate me, gotta be afraid of me, and of course everybody's laughing at him now because we all know who he is. Okay, so they have brought in the understudy, and there is a new American Al-Qaeda named Yosef Al-Khattab. Ooh, big scary name, and they've got a picture of him out there where he's holding all these guns and knives, and he's dressed up like a wannabe Rambo, and he's scowling at the camera, and he supposedly has this website with things in it, like pictures of the Statue of Liberty with an axe buried in the back of the head. I mean, very heavy-handed, very over-the-top.
There was also a link to a puppet show mocking Danny Pearl's beheading. Take a look.
Oh, that's awful. You know, just looking more like a movie prop than anything else here. So, as it turns out, this is another fake. His real name is Joseph Cohen.
He's a 39-year-old New York City taxi driver, as you mentioned. He called himself Yosef Al-Khattab, but he was born Joseph Cohen here in America. He is a Jew.
And he is another manufactured front to try and convince Americans that Al-Qaeda is actually here in the United States. And this is why we've got to be doing this, doing surveillance on the American people and reading their email and listening to their phone calls and all this stuff, because you never know when we're going to get into a situation with the American Al-Qaeda. And it's all a front. It's a fake.
He was not their commander. There is also no evidence that bin Laden used the term Al-Qaeda to refer to the name of a group until after September the 11th, when he realized that this was the term the Americans had given him.
There was constant discussion about him hiding out in caves, and I think many times the American people have a perception that it's a little hole dug out of the side of a mountain.
Oh, no.
This is it. This is a fortress.
Yes.
A complex, multi-tiered, bedrooms and offices on the top, as you can see. Secret exits on the side and on the bottom. Cut deep to avoid thermal detection. A ventilation system to allow people to breathe and to carry on. The entrance is large enough to drive trucks and even tanks. Even computer systems and telephone systems. It's a very sophisticated operation.
Oh, you bet. This is serious business. And there's not one of those. There are many of those.
Oh, I think we've seen this cartoon rhetoric before. There weren't many of those. There weren't any of those. Now, Atta and Al-Amari went out of their way to get on camera on September 10th, the night before the attack. They went to 2 different ATMs, which we have pictures of, a gas station and a Walmart. And then, of course, they're on camera at the airport in Maine. There's a big problem with this, though. Al-Amari isn't dead. The name mix-ups aside, whose face is on the ATM photo? And just who the hell is in the video in Maine? I don't buy the FBI's mix-up excuse at all. What are the odds of a man from Saudi Arabia who had been to America and reported his passport stolen, who just so happened to have the exact same name and birthday as a proposed 9/11 hijacker? It is much more probable that the Israelis stole a passport and the Al-Amari hijacker was just using a stolen identity, as were many of them. You can chalk 1 up to coincidence, but 7? No. There's 7 living hijackers and 1 who died before the event. That's 8 out of 19 who could not have possibly participated in it. And yet the very fraudulent Osama bin Laden confession tapes give praise to people who weren't even involved. I'm going to agree with Seymour Hersh's investigation in the New Yorker. Whatever trail was left deliberately for the FBI to find. He was told by a senior military officer Because of the visas and other documentation needed to infiltrate team members into the United States, a major intelligence service might also have been involved. Yeah, you think?
We would like to correct a report that appeared on CNN last night. Based on information from multiple law enforcement sources, CNN reported that Adnan Bukhari and a brother Amir of Vero Beach, Florida, were suspected to be two of the pilots who crashed into the World Trade Center. Today, CNN learned that Adnan Bukhari is still in Florida, where he was questioned yesterday by the FBI, and after taking a lie detector test, today he was cleared of involvement in Tuesday's airliner attacks. We are sorry for the misinformation. Through his attorney, Bukhari says he is not connected at all with this, that he is helping authorities, and that any documents that they found with his name means his identity was stolen. He says Amir Bukhari, who he says is not his brother, died in a small plane crash last year.
The living Omari, who is the FBI's current and second pick, reported that his passport had been stolen. This is worse than Niger forgeries, and yet, where was the media? So we have an unburned passport, IDs left behind at strip clubs, and then a list with all the names on it is conveniently left in a bag there for everybody to know. And then that list is all goofed up because some of the names on there were wrong. It gets even more interesting when the live reports report truck bombings as well as arrests. And then this suddenly disappears from the media and the American conscience. Instead, we are fed images of dancing Palestinians. It's funny how Palestinians were featured dancing on every single channel when this was a false prepackaged tape, and yet the Israelis who actually were dancing on 9/11 never see airtime. The dancing Israelis who were working for Mossad front company Urban Moving Systems get caught in a van with traces of explosives. They were filming the 9/11 attacks in New York with the planes crashing into the buildings before it happened. So they just decided to set up a film on that particular day, driving around in a van that had traces of explosives, and there were nearly $5,000 stuffed in their sock, and they just strolling through, set up in the park, put a camera, let's point at the World Trade Center for no particular reason, just in case something happens. And then, of course, 9/11 happens. They're there. That's not reported. The truck bombs are never followed up on, and the massive spy ring is never aired. How did the Israelis know what was going to happen? What happened to the truck bombers? Why were the reports of the truck bombs never brought up again, and the investigations into the spy rings never got airtime? Why is that? Well, I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for the U.S. media to do an in-depth report about it. Anything that can involve Israel is off limits. They won't even report on a 40-year, very open, very verifiable military occupation of racial colonization and ethnic cleansing that could make conquistadors blush.
To 15 people, 11 of them children.
With all the obvious mistakes about the hijackers' identities, the phony bin Laden tapes, the physics of the building, the lies about the anthrax, the lies about weapons of mass destruction, the way the whole narrative was woven together with 9/11, you'd think somebody should be explaining this. There ought to be an investigation into this. Well, there was a investigation into it, sort of. There was supposed to be, from the 9/11 Commission. It wasn't something the Bush administration wanted. Bush was adamant about blocking the formation of a commission to investigate 9/11. Well, why would the President of the United States not want 9/11 to be investigated? He battled with Tom Daschle, Majority Leader of the Senate and an anthrax target, about who would conduct an investigation. It wasn't until more than a year later that he conditionally permitted it. The conditions were that the Bush administration selected the commission heads who then selected and controlled the commission. It's a little bit like hiring Dracula to guard the blood bank. It would be like hiring Madoff to investigate fraud. You might as well have a former head of the CIA investigate the Kennedy assassination, or have Boris Yeltsin investigate Boris Berezovsky. Wait, those last two actually did happen. Bush's first pick to chair the 9/11 Commission was Henry Kissinger, upon the advice of Karl Rove. Henry Kissinger, a crook with a rap sheet so long and involved in disastrous covert operations and lies that no one could take him seriously. He resigned not because of that, but because he didn't want to disclose his clients. Because of the obvious conflicts of interest and the utterly negative credibility, Kissinger finally removed himself from the position. That didn't stop his less well-known business partner from making the cut, James R. Thompson. An interesting phenomena occurred on 9/11 where individuals using the Israeli-based instant messenger service Otigo were warned about 9/11 before the attack. At least 2 individuals came forward about the warnings they had received. Certainly bin Laden wasn't warning these American Jews to avoid the towers. Someone else had prior knowledge. Hollinger Inc. and Hollinger Digital owns Onset Tech, which cooperates with the messenger software of Otigo as well as Converse. When you pull up the board of directors for Hollinger, you'll find some nefarious characters: Henry Kissinger, Richard Pearl, and James R. Thompson from the 9/11 Commission. With Thompson on the 9/11 Commission, you can be damn sure they didn't look into Otigo. It was Hollinger-owned papers also that spread the bogus rumor about 4,000 Jews not showing up to work on the day of 9/11. This served to obfuscate the very real forewarnings from Otigo by masking it as pointless anti-Jewish rhetoric. Hollinger would later be used by Pearl to bolster his Iraq War investments, and then it had a large scandal with Conrad Black, of which Thompson was also a part of. He ended up not doing much on the commission at all for a year. But not to be outdone by that audacious selection for the commissioners, the Bush administration topped itself in see-through corruption by choosing Iran-Contra's Tower Commission chairman, who worked with Dick Cheney, to co-chair the 9/11 Commission as well. I guess if you do well with one whitewash, then why not another one? Hamilton was also sitting on advisory boards for the CIA. But don't worry, they could still go lower. Much, much lower. Even worse than Hamilton becoming the co-chairman was placing a Zionist warmonger, Philip Zelikow, who was plucked right out of Bush's own National Security Council to be the executive director for the commission. Zelikow would have total control over hiring the 9/11 Commissioner's staff and set up a tight filtering system over information sharing that went right through himself or Hamilton. One of his first actions was to hire Michael Hurley, a current officer in the CIA, to investigate the CIA. He also echoed the neocons' propaganda about Iraq and 9/11. How pathetic for the 9/11 Commission's executive director to parrot the baseless Iraq did 9/11 deceptions. It wasn't new for Zelikow, it was an opportunity to promote his worldview. In their book on the Israeli lobby, Mearsheimer and Walt exposed Zelikow for calling for war with Iraq to protect Israeli interests in speeches that he gave to universities. Zelikow would later admit as much with a so-what attitude. Apparently, he forgot the 9/11 Commission was to investigate an attack on America and not to be a tool for Israeli interest. No one was really looking into 9/11. They were looking into how to use it. There was one dissenter in Zelikow's way, a staff member that slipped through the cracks, Donna Lesman. Breaking Zelikow's filter protocol, Lesman dug into the direct 9/11 connections with the government of Saudi Arabia. Zelikow fired her and had her findings deleted from the 9/11 Commission's report, 28 pages redacted. Perhaps she asked how a Saudi GIT agent working with the FBI, was providing housing and actually living with 9/11 hijackers.
National security whistleblowers tried to testify before the commission, but were either not asked to testify or their testimony was only barely acknowledged, or worse yet, completely omitted from the record.
Zelikow was later revealed to be the real author of the Bush Doctrine, the justification of preemptive war, which has led to the deaths of more than 1 million people so far.
Zelikow was the author of a very important document issued by the White House in September 2002 that really turned military doctrine on its head and said that the United States could become involved in preemptive war, preemptive defense, that we could attack a nation that didn't pose an immediate military threat to this country. And obviously in September 2002, it sure appeared that that document was being written with one target in mind, Iraq. Now, as I say, the author of the document at the time was anonymous. We didn't know that Philip Zelikow had written this thing. And that becomes known, I think, widely on the staff only in the final months of the 9/11 Commission investigation, and it appeared to pose yet another conflict of interest for Zelikow.
Thomas Keane, the other co-chairman of the commission, was there about as often as Obama went to the Senate. He was too busy engaged in his own personal profiteering racket. He said he could only commit 1 day a week to the commission and would only appear in the press if it was with Hamilton. Apparently, investigating 9/11 was not important enough for him to postpone his other affairs, and this allowed Hamilton and Zelikow even more control over the operation. Like James Thompson, Thomas Keane was too involved with his own scandals. What excellent choices for investigators. It's not like 3,000 people were killed. Keane later promoted and was greatly impressed with the comic book version of the 9/11 report, which reduced it down to about 161 picture pages. And he's currently still going around the country hacking this junk into school systems to get elementary school kids even to learn about 9/11.
When you hear about the idea of the 9/11 Commission report as essentially a comic book, your first reaction is, what are you, crazy?
It's accurate. I mean, the graphic version is accurate. That's what happened.
How could they compromise the integrity of the investigation further? What could make it even less objective? Fred Fielding, a current lawyer for Z, better known as Blackwater, a private mercenary firm currently on trial for murder and rape. This bastard actually countersued the families of the contractors' victims hung from a bridge in Fallujah to block them from gaining access into the circumstances surrounding the event. The details of what really happened are uncovered in Jeremy Scahill's book, Blackwater, Rise of the Mercenary State. Fielding wasn't the only important investigator working with Blackwater. The Inspector General, who was supposed to let the other shoe drop on Hollinger and Richard Pearl, also found employment at Blackwater as a senior executive. You see the DVD extra to unravel that mess. Fielding was from George Bush's White House counsel, but don't worry, he was compromised further than that. He was a lawyer for a very high-level man in the Bush administration. You may have heard of him. His name is George Bush. It's bad enough that Bush refused to be interviewed by the commission without Cheney, but he also had his lawyer there, and on the side of the investigators.
President, why are you and the Vice President insisting on appearing together before the 9/11 Commission?
Because the 9/11 Commission wants to ask us questions. That's why we're meeting, and I look forward to meeting with them and answering their questions.
Why you're appearing together rather than separately, which was their request?
Because it's a good chance for both of us to answer questions that the 9/11 Commission is looking forward to asking us, and I'm looking forward to answering them. Let's see.
Don't you think that the families deserve to have a transcript or to be able to see what
Adam,
you
you
said?
asked me that question yesterday.
For an
I
answer
got the
today.
same answer, yeah.
You're one of those four that gets to see these documents. Would that change your opinion?
No. They don't want any more eyeballs to see their documents than they can possibly get away with. It's a scam. It's absolutely disgusting. The president has said only a minority of the commission can see a minority of the documents, and then they have to clear what they're going to say to the rest of the commission with the White House.
These blatant conflicts of interest should have been all over the news like a Tiger Woods sex scandal, but they were too busy promoting other things. The 9/11 Commission was a cover-up. It was a total joke, a farce. Heck, why not allow PNAC members to do the investigation? They did. John Lehman, former Secretary of the Navy in 1987, while Jonathan Pollard was spying for Israel through naval intel, was also chosen to join the 9/11 conmen, and he was a PNAC signature. PNAC, the Project for a New American Century, was a neoconservative think tank from the American Enterprise Institute. Its members comprised Department of Defense officials and media. They pulled together older Israeli-centric plans from Odin Yinon and IASVA's Clean Break papers to create their magnum opus, Rebuilding America's Defenses. There's been a lot of focus on lines from that particular document, but this narrow scope has overshadowed their other important works, particularly on Afghanistan and Iraq. I can't go over all of them, I have in previous films, but here's an overview. This is what the Lie Factory cranked out. Of course, these are also the men who lied about Prague, Atta, and anthrax. The 9/11 Commission was an extension of the PNAC narrative of deception. Their report ignored the existence of core columns in the Twin Towers. The information on Saudi Arabia was redacted, and the info on Israel didn't even make it that far. Perhaps the most shocking and awful was their investigation into the World Trade Center No. 7. They didn't even do one. They spent $12 million to tell you nothing. Real American patriots have investigated it on their own for free. And trust me, it's an uphill battle against disinfo and ridicule. It doesn't matter how many people say what. It's based on evidence. That's all we need. There are reports of truck bombs and secondary explosions. And when looking back at the whole picture, the anthrax, the blame it on Iraq, the Patriot Act, and everything else that fits in, it becomes clear that they're lying about the towers as well. And a lot of people knew it was going to happen too. There were massive profits made. The crisis allowed for trillions of dollars to become unaccounted for. And the data that was housed that could track the massive corporate fraud was physically destroyed by the section of the Pentagon that was hit, as well as Building 7 in New York.
For the Pentagon, when its own auditors admit the military cannot account for 25% of what it already spends.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
$2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America.
Yet, how do you prosecute the government? Obviously, they don't investigate themselves. Thus, the Inspector General of the Defense Department is just part of the military-industrial complex, and the 9/11 Commission was itself composed of PNAC members, war profiteers, and criminals of prior cover-ups.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
We can't rely on these investigations. And where is our media? It would be easy for the mass media to explain this in a day, but again, these companies are just an extension of the corporatocracy at large. And yet we've had waves and waves, thousands, perhaps millions of citizens in America who have been reporting about the lies surrounding the war in Iraq, as well as 9/11, independently on their own, often for free. There are thousands of blogs and websites, and it seems like the only way around this is the web. But that is rapidly changing too. The ADL has already gone on a purging spree on YouTube. My account was completely deleted. Not just my videos, my entire account and all my videos were removed. No explanation was given. War by Deception 2008 wasn't up for even an hour. It is very important to realize that none of this would be possible if schools and the media, especially the media, would just explain what is happening rather than lying to you. Mass media outlets. It is very important to realize that none of this would be possible if schools and the media, especially the media, would just explain what is happening rather than lying to you. Mass media outlets, that's the televised media, you know them as ABC and NBC, CBS, and Fox, are owned by media conglomerates. That is, they each answer to a parent company. ABC, for example, is owned by the Walt Disney Corporation. NBC by GE and Microsoft. CNN by AOL Time Warner, CBS by Viacom, Fox News, if you even want that to count, by the Rupert Murdoch Corporation. News reports get dictated from the top down and avoid issues such as Israel, the Niger forgeries, AIPAC spying, the Office of Special Plans, North American Union, Council on Foreign Relations, Trilateral Commission, Bank of International Settlements, MEGA, Project for a New American Century, White House Iraq Group, Military Industrial Complex, IASPA, American Enterprise Institute, Defense Policy Board's misgivings, the American Turkish Council, Bilderberg, and anything to do with 9/11, and anything to do with the lies about the Iraq War, post and pre-invasion. Mass media conglomerates are part of the military-industrial complex. If you look at their board of directors, they have overlapping membership with the largest aerospace companies in key multinational defense industries, all which profit handsomely from the budget of the Defense Department. Government employees, as well as these board of director members, all profit through privately held equity firms which engage in insider trading and a variety of immoral corporate profiteering, usually through war. America spends more of its tax money on defense than the rest of the world put together. Over 52% of our discretionary taxes are spent on offense, which they call defense. But it's more than that. America borrows money from the Federal Reserve, money printed out of thin air, new money, and uses that to pay for defense. So the greater portion of our taxes plus borrowed money, which causes massive inflation, all goes into the pockets of these war pigs in the military-industrial complex. And it's not just the Department of Defense, it's several departments. It's the Department of Defense, it's the Department of State, the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Energy. They're all tied to the MIC. It is the greatest umbrella corporation in the world, and it has to be stopped.
Military Keynesianism, the military-industrial complex, the devotion of massive resources to the military has unintended consequences that we refuse to acknowledge. That we are now spending close to $1 trillion a year, that's 1,000 billion, on our military establishment. This is not the defense appropriation that is published. That's simply the annual appropriation of the Department of Defense. It doesn't include the money spent on nuclear weapons. That's in the Department of Energy. It doesn't include the money spent on Veterans Affairs. That's in the Department of Veterans Affairs, including treating our wounded from Iraq. It doesn't include foreign military aid. That's in the State Department. It doesn't include the actual defense of the country. That's the Department of Homeland Security. Since after 9/11, we've discovered the Department of Defense has nothing to do with defense of the country. It's busying itself with warfare in outer space or some other lucrative, if useless, way to spend money. It all adds up to an unbelievable amount that is, over time, not sustainable. It reminds us of a famous remark by Herbert Stein when he was chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors in Richard Nixon's administration. He rather famously said, "Things that can't go on forever don't." These things can't go on forever, and they're not going to. That is, the American empire could come to an end before this film is over if just one little thing happened. If Saudi Arabia decided that it wanted to be paid for its oil in euros instead of dollars, why should we be concerned about imperialism and militarism? It's a suicide pact. That's the way empires end.
The U.S. is always at war or part of some conflict, and it doesn't matter if you rename a war a police action or whatever. It's a war. The point of war for the U.S. is not to win, but to prolong. In order to operate, the MIC needs conflicts. Perpetual war is their openly stated goal. Perpetual war means perpetual profits. Ultimately, they aim to monopolize vital resources, destroy potential economic or military rivals, devalue currencies to wipe out the middle class, and rule with impunity as corporate oligarchs in a globalized shadow government. Sorry for the black screen, but I have to censor the war images from Iraq and Afghanistan for YouTube, which is unfortunate because I believe it's really important for people to see the faces of war and to see the true horror of war, to understand it on an emotional level, because there's too much detachment, too much cognitive dissonance. With the profitable Cold War over and hundreds of billions in security fraud and a network of mediums to obfuscate off-the-books financing for covert and illegal operations under investigation, an event was needed to cover the old crimes and create the atmosphere for new ones. This wasn't for America or solely by American elements. It was multinational. Showing that 9/11 was done and why it was done and who covered it up isn't the same as how it was done. We've seen airplanes and truck bombs, but what about the other explosions higher up in the towers? If bombs were inside, how could they be set in there with so many employees working in the towers? And who did it? You can forget about security, that's a non-issue. But exactly how and where could one place charges without anyone noticing? A good place to start would be the men arrested for fake IDs that granted them access to the towers to fix sprinkler systems, upgrade internet cables, move out furniture, and work on chronically broken elevators, especially when the Israeli-owned company they claimed to work for had no authenticity. Movers bring the goods, elevator and cable mechanics set them in place, maintenance shuts down the fire prevention system. Quick 3-step plan.
Any sense at all, have you heard anything, even anecdotally, from the cops about how many people managed to get out of the building before they collapsed?
No, absolutely not. But there's also, I don't know if it was the case now, but I do know that one of the towers had a major elevator that went all the way to the top that was malfunctioning and has been malfunctioning for at least a month. They've been having a lot of trouble with that.
The details of that story and my investigation into it are on my website. Yeah, that's right, I'm making you go to my website. I get something out of making this film. All of this should have and could have been in more press, but aside from the tight control over the broadcast news by the Pentagon, in the immediate post-9/11 atmosphere, it was sacrilegious to question anything. The press creates the narrative, no matter how silly, by repetition and repetition. The news is highly filtered and controlled. These people are normally just talking bobbleheads reading teleprompters and sticking to daily talking points issued from the top down. By repeating uniform catchphrases simultaneously across the media spectrum, they create a lemming effect. But ABC and NBC, CBS, and Fox don't really differ. They usually have the same exact stories, often in the same order, with the same catchphrases. They are trying to lead you to think the way they are told to tell you to think. It pays to lie. William Crystal, despite being wrong about everything, gets a job at the New York Times. Judith Miller, despite having gone to jail for 85 days for some of her lies, gets hired by Fox News. And Paul Wolfowitz, the idiot who said that Iraq's oil revenue would pay for the cost of the war within 2 years, gets rewarded for that economic blunder by being appointed head of the World Bank. The following FBI agents who screwed up or covered up investigations into anthrax and into the 9/11 hijackers got promotions.
But you can imagine
we are being manipulated by a tiny minority in a global game of theft and murder of our fellow man. We, all of us, are being robbed daily by the military central banking financial system. We don't have to live this way. And we don't need our resources allocated by a central supercomputer or any other glorified high-tech communism. That is not a solution, and it is not realistic. One massive contributor to the debt for defense racket that allows this to take place on the scale that it does is central banking on a fiat money system. The other main method of manipulation is mass media. We've got to end the Fed and abandon the daily deceptions of the mainstream media. And slowly this is happening and has been happening. For one of the first times in history, we have a way of fighting back. The web has allowed us to break the media monopoly. We are seeing anti-Fed rallies, books, and films when this was nearly impossible before. There is a niche for anti-war info to counter propaganda. Now is the time to end the cycle. Everything stems from alternative media. Every year we grow. The problems in government and banking won't be fixed until we take back the media. This is why it is vital to keep the web free and open. It's also crucial to support alternative media websites. These people are not paid and they face a lot of flack. Just ignore the kooks. We are winning this struggle. End the deceptions and end the wars. Thank you for watching my film. Please see all the extras on the DVD or wherever I put them on the web. I thank you to everyone who is helping support me by sharing this film, and a handful of you who sent some donations so it was possible to complete this film. No more wars for deception. No more Zionist neocon plans. Don't listen to them about Iran. Israel got caught just in 2002, the Zim shipping company, which moved out of the WTC just weeks before the attacks, got busted sending armaments to Iran. Isn't that a little fishy? The same things are going on still. It is crucial we all understand this and put a stop to it. We are the majority. We can take our nation back. It's our government, it's our media. We are responsible for this. Some of you people elected Obama. I don't know what's wrong with you. I don't know why you believed that he would change anything. This generic sloganeering of hope, change, believe is utter nonsense. He was a senator. He had a voting record. You could have known exactly how he really was. It's too late now. Let's focus on the positive and fix what we can. I appreciate your support. Have a nice day. Here are my websites for future reference.
Medical student. He was down there, he was trying to help people. His name is Daryl.
Yeah, so I was just standing there, you know, we were watching the building actually because it was on fire, the bottom floors of the building were on fire, and, you know, we heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. Turned around, we were shocked to see that the building was, well, it looked like there was a shock wave ripping through the building, and the windows all busted out, and, you know, it was horrifying. And then, you know, about a second later, the bottom floor caves out, and the building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground. You know, we were in shock, and then the worst part about it, we saw the smoke and the plumes of smoke coming after us, and we had to run north, actually, on that street. We just ran north to escape from the smoke, and luckily we weren't hurt, but it was certainly very, very scary. Yeah.
Friends, they are NYU medical students. They are going to go back and help with the